7 years, 2,555 days. No call on my birthday, no text on Father's Day, not even a voicemail the morning my younger brother passed away in a hospice bed in Tucson. I had made a kind of peace with that silence, told myself it was just how things had settled, like sediment at the bottom of a jar. You shake the jar long enough, everything goes cloudy. You leave it alone, everything sinks to where it belongs. Then, on a Thursday night in late October at 10:52, my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I didn't recognize the number, but I recognized what was underneath it before I even swiped the screen open. The same way a retired electrician can walk into a room and know the wiring is wrong before he ever pulls the panel. Something about the air, something about the hum. My hand had a slight tremor when I picked it up. Not from anger, from something I had not felt in 7 years, something I should have known better than to feel. Hope? I read the message twice, then once more out loud, standing in the kitchen of the house I bought the year I retired, a 2-bedroom cottage a half-mile from the beach in Pawleys Island, South Carolina. The house I had posted about on Facebook 3 weeks earlier, in a moment of quiet satisfaction after 35 years of crawling through attics and running conduit in the Carolina heat. Hey, saw your post. Looks like things are going well for you. We should catch up. There's a project I want to talk to you about. Could be good for both of us. Can you meet me for dinner Friday? Melrose Kitchen in downtown Columbia, 7 p.m. And Dad, I'd need you to come ready to talk about a real number. Think $200,000. I set the phone face down on the counter, then I picked it up and read it again. No, I've missed you. No, how have you been? Not even a hope you're doing all right. Just a sighting on Facebook and a dollar figure at the end of a sentence, like a balance due attached to a form letter. Welcome to Dad's Bold Revenge. Sit with me a while. This story is going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button before we get going, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I think you'll want to stay for all of it. Part of me, the stubborn, foolish part that apparently never fully gives up no matter how many times it should, started making excuses for him immediately. Maybe he was nervous. Maybe he didn't know how to start after so long. Maybe we should catch up, was his clumsy way of saying he wanted his father back and didn't know how to ask for it directly. I had been an electrician for 35 years. You learn early that a wire that looks dead can still be live. You learn to test before you touch. I had not tested anything. I had just stood in my kitchen at nearly 11 o'clock at night, heart doing something foolish in my chest, reading my son's first words to me in 7 years, and finding the 3 I needed buried somewhere in the middle of them. We should catch up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time that night, not sleeping, not really thinking, just sitting the way you sit when something has shifted the furniture in a room you had finally gotten used to. I got up and walked through the house. Out of habit, I ran my hand along the wall of the hallway, where my son used to tack baseball cards with pushpins when he was 12, leaving little holes in the drywall that I never filled because filling them would have meant admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. I stood outside the small spare room where I kept his old catcher's mitt and a few boxes of his things. I had not opened that door in over a year. I didn't open it that night either. I just stood there with my palm flat against the wood and let myself remember the last time he was actually in this house. He was 25. He stood in my living room. This was at the old place in Lexington, before the divorce was fully done, and told me I had never really believed in him, that I had spent my whole life being too practical, too cautious, too afraid to back anything that didn't come with a warranty and a manual. His girlfriend at the time, not the woman he eventually married, a different one entirely, had a business idea. A boutique fitness studio franchise. They needed seed capital. When I told him I wouldn't pull from my retirement account to fund a business I had never seen a business plan for, he said I was exactly the kind of man he had always been afraid of becoming. He left, didn't look back. That was 7 years ago. I went back to the kitchen around 2 in the morning, poured a glass of water I didn't finish, and read that text one more time. His name at the top of the screen. My son, 32 years old now. Married, I knew from mutual relatives, to a woman he'd met 4 or 5 years back. Smart, someone had told me. Ambitious. Worked in finance, I had never met her. By the time the sun came up over the tree line, I had decided to say yes to dinner. But I want to be clear about something, because this next part matters. I did not hire anyone. I was not trying to set a trap. I was simply a father who, after 35 years of tracing faults in systems, knew that when something looks clean on the surface and smells wrong underneath, you do not close the panel and walk away. You get your meter out. You start at the source. I sat down at my laptop the following evening and looked up my daughter-in-law's company. Her name was Serena. The company was called Meridian Capital Strategies. The website was sharp. Clean fonts, professional headshots. My son in a good suit shaking hands at what looked like a charity gala, my daughter-in-law front and center in every photo with the kind of smile that looks warm right up until you try to locate the warmth and find it doesn't quite reach the eyes. Boutique wealth management, tailored growth strategies for discerning investors, a trusted name in the Southeast. Good, I thought. Maybe I've been wrong about all of this from the very beginning. Then I found the first crack. A civil lawsuit filed in federal court in Georgia 17 months prior. 4 plaintiffs. The complaint alleged that funds transferred to Meridian Capital client accounts had been mismanaged. Commingled was the specific word used, and that promised quarterly statements had either arrived falsified or not arrived at all. The suit had been settled. Terms confidential. No admission of wrongdoing. I read the filing 3 times, the same way I'd read my son's text message. Then I made a fresh pot of coffee and kept going. The next morning, I pulled the state licensing records for Meridian Capital Strategies. The registered address for their primary office was a business suite near 5 Points in Columbia, the kind of place that rents mailboxes and conference rooms by the hour, not the kind of address a legitimate wealth management firm operates from. I cross-referenced the 2 partner names listed on the firm's website against FINRA's broker check database. Neither of them appeared, not suspended, not flagged for violations, simply not there. As though 2 people listed as licensed financial advisors did not exist in any regulatory record I could locate. I sat back in my chair and thought about a specific kind of job I had run into twice in 35 years. Old buildings, grandfathered systems, where a previous electrician had threaded new wire through old conduit to make things look updated without actually replacing anything. Looked fine from the panel. Looked fine from the outlets. Looked completely fine until you pulled the wire and found it was running hot through insulation that hadn't been rated for that load in 40 years. That was what I was looking at. On Sunday, I found the prior marriage record. My daughter-in-law had been married once before. Her first husband, I found his name in a court filing from Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, had filed for divorce and attached to that filing a civil fraud claim. A judgment had been entered against her in the amount of $68,000. The judgment had never been satisfied. She had moved to a different state and, apparently, started over entirely. I printed every page, the Georgia lawsuit, the licensing gaps, the Mecklenburg County judgment. I put it all in a manila folder, the same kind I used to keep inspection records and permit copies in the back of my work van, and I set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. My son was asking me for $200,000 to put into a company that I now had documented reason to believe was built on the same foundation as every faulty panel I had ever been called in to fix, after someone else's shortcuts had finally caught fire. I thought about calling him, telling him over the phone, but I knew I had known my son for 32 years, that when he felt cornered, he didn't yell. He went quiet in a particular way that left no space for anything to enter. If I called him with this, the door would close before I could get my foot through it. So I kept the dinner, I brought the folder. I dressed the way I dress for anything that matters. Dark slacks, the navy sport coat I have had since my younger brother's wedding, leather shoes that are not fancy but are clean. My ex-wife, Lydia, used to tell me I looked like a substitute teacher whenever I wore that jacket. I never minded. I was not going to Melrose kitchen to impress anyone. I was going to look at my son's face for the first time in 7 years. The drive up I-26 took about 90 minutes on a Friday evening. Rain most of the way. I left the radio off. I needed the quiet more than I needed anything else. Melrose kitchen has the kind of lighting that makes everyone look a little better than they actually feel. I have been inside twice in my life, both times for something that counted. This was the third. I spotted them before they saw me. My son was at a corner table, his back partially toward the entrance. He looked older. Of course he did. 7 years is 7 years. But the way he held his shoulders, slightly forward, slightly braced, that was the same. That was the posture of a man waiting for something to land, not the posture of someone looking forward to seeing his father. My daughter-in-law saw me first. She stood up and extended her hand before I had fully reached the table, with the practiced ease of someone who has run that particular move enough times that it no longer requires any thought. My son stood a beat behind her, and for just a moment, just one, something crossed his face that was not calculation and was not performance. Something that looked like relief and like guilt, and a little like the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder watching Sunday afternoon games. Dad. He said it like he was testing whether the words still worked. Hey, son, I said. We sat down. The first 15 minutes were exactly what you would expect. Careful conversation, surface level, the kind of talk that happens when people who share a long history are pretending the history is not sitting right there at the table with them. My daughter-in-law did most of the talking. She was skilled at it, warm, curious, asking me about Polly's Island, saying it sounded beautiful, mentioning they had been thinking about a beach trip. She ordered a bottle of wine without looking at the price, poured my son's glass and then her own, and did not offer me any. A small thing. The kind of small thing a man who spent decades reading systems learns to file away. So, she said, setting down her glass and resting her forearms on the white tablecloth, with the ease of someone who had run this particular meeting before. I know this is a little unusual, reaching out after so much time, but we've been watching something really exciting build at Meridian, and honestly, she glanced at my son with what was designed to look like a spontaneous, loving look. When we saw your beach house post, we thought, this is the right moment. This could be something good for the whole family. My son nodded. He had said very little since I sat down. She reached into her bag and placed a document on the table, slid it toward me across the tablecloth with one hand, reaching for her wine with the other. The header carried the Meridian Capital logo. I could see a signature line near the bottom with my name already typed below it. It's a preferred investor agreement, she said. A $200,000 position earns 7% annually, guaranteed, with a buyback option at 36 months. This is not a risk play. We're talking about a portfolio that's already delivering real returns. This isn't a favor to us. She paused for effect. This is an opportunity. The way she said my name, smooth, familiar, like we went back years, was exactly the kind of reading I had learned to watch for. The circuit that looks completely normal right up until you put the meter on it. I did not look at the document. I looked at my son. Son, I said, keeping my voice even. The same tone I use when I have to tell a homeowner something they have not prepared themselves to hear. I need 5 minutes alone with you. Just you and me. There's something I need to show you privately. My daughter-in-law's expression did not flicker. She was very good. Anything you'd like to discuss with my husband, you can discuss with both of us, she said, still smiling. We don't keep things from each other. That's just not how we operate. My son looked at the table. Son, I said again quietly and waited until he looked up at me. 5 minutes, please, as your father. This is not about the money. Something moved behind his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but something like a locked door that someone had forgotten to deadbolt, shifting slightly in a draft. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. His voice was flat. He had made up his mind before I arrived, I realized, or the decision had been made for him somewhere along the way. All right, I said. I reached down, picked up the manila folder from my lap, and set it in the center of the table. Between the wine glasses, between the document with my name pre-printed at the bottom, between my son and me and 7 years of silence. Everything you need to know about where your company actually stands is in that folder, I said. A civil lawsuit in Georgia federal court filed 17 months ago. 4 plaintiffs claiming client funds were commingled and statements were falsified. Licensing records showing 2 of your firm's listed partners don't appear in any FINRA or state regulatory database I could find. And a civil fraud judgment from Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, $68,000 entered against your wife from her previous marriage. Never satisfied. I stopped for a second, not for effect, but because I needed to keep my voice where I needed it to be. I am not here to embarrass anyone at this table. I came tonight because you are my son, and you are 32 years old, and you are about to make a decision that could cost you something far larger than $200,000. The table went quiet. The restaurant hummed pleasantly around us, low music, the murmur of other tables, completely indifferent to what was happening in our corner of the room. My daughter-in-law had stopped smiling. My son had not moved. Those are misunderstandings, she said. Her voice had changed. Not dramatic, not raised, just cooler, like a thermostat being turned down 1 degree at a time. Anyone building something real runs into legal friction. That's what you don't understand about business at this level. I did not look at her. My eyes had not moved from my son since I set the folder down. She's right, Dad. His voice was quiet. You've never understood how things work at this level. There it was. The same sentence as 7 years ago in a different room, rearranged slightly. I looked at my son for a long moment, past the suit, past the set of his jaw, past the woman sitting next to him whose hand had moved almost imperceptibly toward her bag. I looked at him and I saw the 12-year-old who used to hand me tools from a small red toolbox on Saturday mornings, handing me a flathead when I asked for a Phillips, being so genuinely proud of himself the first time he got it right. I had spent 35 years tracing faults in systems that other people had built badly. I knew, as surely as I had ever known anything from a meter reading, that I could not repair this circuit tonight. not with the current running the way it was running. I pushed the folder across the table to his side. Don't sign anything, I said. Not tonight, not until you have someone independent look at every page in that folder. That's all I'm asking you to do. Then I pushed the signed document back toward the center of the table, untouched, and I reached into my jacket and took out two $50 bills and set them beside my water glass, which I had not touched once during the meal. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket the way I always do before I leave somewhere that mattered. It was good to see you, I said to my son. I meant it more than he will probably ever know. I walked out through the low lighting and the Friday evening crowd, through the front door and into the October air. I stood in the parking lot with one hand on the roof of my truck and just breathed for a moment. Then I drove back down I-26 in the rain. I did not sleep well that Friday night. Saturday I repainted the front porch trim on the cottage, which did not need repainting. Sunday I drove to church and said a prayer for a son I was not sure I could reach. Monday I made 2 trips to the hardware store for no real reason and came back with things I did not need. I did not call him, he did not call me. The 2 days of silence were the loudest 2 days I can remember in a long time. Tuesday evening I was in the living room with the local news on low, more background noise than anything, the way you keep a light on in an empty room, when the anchor's tone shifted. That particular shift that happens when a story has actual weight in it. Breaking tonight from Colombia, federal agents have arrested the founder and principal of a Midlands wealth management firm on charges including wire fraud, securities fraud, and misappropriation of client funds. Sources indicate the investigation, which began earlier this year, following complaints from multiple investors, involves an estimated $3 million in assets. The arrest was made this afternoon. I set my coffee cup down slowly. They cut to footage. Shaky phone video from what looked like a building lobby near 5 Points. A woman I had met exactly once, being walked out through glass doors with her hands behind her back, her face turned partially away but recognizable to me from across a restaurant table. My son was not in the footage. I did not know yet whether that was good or not. I sat in the quiet of my living room and did not feel triumphant. I want to be completely honest with you about that, because it would be easy to say I felt vindicated, felt satisfied, felt the clean rightness of a man proven correct. I did not feel any of that. I felt the way you feel after 35 years of finding faults in systems and having it never once feel like winning, just like work that needed doing, done. And underneath that, very far down, something I had not let myself feel in a long time. Something close to relief. The relief of a man who held a live wire at arm's length long enough for someone else to finally cut the power. I made coffee I didn't drink and I waited because I already knew what was coming next. The call came Thursday morning, not a text, a call. He let it ring twice, hung up, then called back immediately, the way he used to do when he was a teenager and wasn't sure if he was allowed to want something from me. I answered. He didn't say hello, he just said Dad, and the way he said it this time was nothing like the way he said it across the table at Melrose kitchen. This time it cracked right down the middle, like a piece of timber that has been under slow, sustained pressure for far too long. I know, I said. I didn't know what she was doing, he said. I swear to God I didn't know. I thought it was real. I thought everything she showed me was real. I believe you, I said, and I did. Not because believing him was easy after 7 years, but because I had read that table on Friday night. I had watched his face. I knew which one had been running the current and which one had been carrying the load without understanding what it was. What do I do? He said. First thing today, I said. You call an attorney, not tomorrow. Today you find someone who handles federal matters, and you tell them everything you know and everything you have access to. You cooperate completely. You don't wait and you don't try to protect her because some part of you thinks there's still something worth protecting. That window is closing fast if it hasn't already. I mean, after all of that, his voice dropped. What do I do after? I was quiet for a moment, long enough that he might have thought the line had gone dead. You rebuild, I said, one day at a time. You spend some real time figuring out who you actually are when someone who is using you isn't there telling you. He cried then, not the composed kind, the kind that sounds like something structural giving way all at once. I sat on my couch and held the phone and did not rush him through any of it. When it settled, I said, I'll help you find a good attorney. I'll make sure you have what you need, food on the table, rent covered while you get your footing. I can do that and I want to do that. But he said, he knew me well enough to know there was a but coming. But this is different from before, I said. You are 32 years old, and I am not going to step in and make this comfortable enough that nothing actually changes on your end. I love you too much to do that. A long silence. The folder was sitting on that table on Friday night, I said. I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it because I need you to understand that I drove to Colombia to protect you, not to be right about anything. And you need to sit with what that means. I know, he said. I know you know, I said. Now you have to decide what you're going to do with knowing it. We talked for another 40 minutes after that. It was not easy conversation. There were things said that had been waiting 7 years to be said, and some of them were hard to hear, and some of them were harder to say, and when we finally got off the phone, neither of us was entirely okay. But we were talking in a way that had some actual ground underneath it, something solid for the first time in a very long time. He asked if he could come down to Pawleys Island sometime, see the cottage. I told him yes. I told him the door would be open when he was ready to walk through it as my son, not as someone who needed something extracted from me, not as someone standing across a table with a document, but as my son. That was the only door I was keeping open, and I meant it without conditions and without a timer on it. It is open still. I drove down to the beach access the morning after that phone call, sat on the tailgate of my truck with a cup of coffee, and watched the water come in. Pelicans working the surf line, same ocean it has always been. I am not a man who goes in much for grand statements or lessons written across sunsets. But I'll tell you this, I spent 35 years in a trade where shortcuts will always catch up to you. Always. A wire with damaged insulation can hold for 1 year, 3 years, 5, but it will arc. Every single time, without exception. The only question is what's nearby when it finally does. My son has a long road in front of him, and most of what happens on that road is going to be his doing, not mine. The best thing I ever learned in 35 years with a tool belt on is that you cannot make a bad circuit safe by just agreeing to live with it. You have to be willing to find the fault, name it clearly, and do the work to fix it right, even when fixing it right means cutting the power and starting over from the panel. I did my part. Whether it's enough, I'll find out in time. If this story meant something to you, go ahead and hit that like button and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from. I'll see you at the next one.